Yeah, you just got to watch moderation. Denny,
Yeah.
I was running stupid. At my age,
Yeah.
running, my heartbeat, I was kicking it up to 200 beats a minute. It was just, in fact, it got to a point where I'm grateful because I would have killed myself on my runs. I would have.
Yeah.
So
Well, there's something to that. Anything that you take to that addictive, like it's you love it, you love doing it, but then it becomes that thing that you got to do, and you got to just, and it's
true.
a little bit of control. It's that.
Didn't have that.
All of us are. We all have it. I mean, people right now are so crazy for David Goggins. I mean, just. But it's like, man, like how many of those guys have I seen in my career? Like they're out there. Those machines are out there.
Yeah, I have a theory about David. I think he's still trying to run ahead of the fat boy. That's my feeling.
There's a reason why you're a psychologist.
Yeah, well, not really. I was trying to run ahead of my wall, and it took a bloke to say to me, "Hey, what are you running away from?" And I went, "Okay." So yeah. Anyway, life teaches you what you need to learn, eh?
It does. Barry, thank you so much for being here today, man. You have not only an impactful story, but your life intersects in this part of history that for a vast majority of the world, they've forgotten. But to warriors, we look to that generation of young men that went out into the bush and fought in the Rhodesian War. I remember when we talked last, we're part of this amazing project, Wounds to Wisdom, but throughout that interview, I just remember thinking, like, I hope he understands that modern warriors look up to all those young boys, young men that fought in that war. Everything you guys did was, I mean, it's so influential. And like I said, there's a culture within our soft community that looks up to you guys. And it's so weird that I mean, from the uniform, the everything, there's a lot of videos and a lot of footage that just gets passed around. Hey, you know anything about the Bush War? Oh, you got to check this out, man. Look at these guys. They're rolling around in flip-flops and short shorts and just taking it to the enemy. Yeah. And it's a pleasure to have you on here today to not just talk about that and not to just, relive those moments, but to talk about what it was really like in that moment as a young man and then afterwards, because that's something that relates to every veteran. War ends at some point, and more often than not, it's not in a way where we get to close that chapter and close that book and say, well, that's done. For a vast majority of us, that chapter gets closed for us and we don't have a say in how it ends.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the ripples of the war carry through the lives afterwards, as mine certainly did in endless challenges. But I mean, I got called up. I'd done 4 years of university, so I was 23 years old. So I was comparatively old to the boys who were the young boys that were 18. Mm-hmm. So I turned up because if I did not come back to Rhodesia, I would not have been allowed back in. And I mean, I loved my country. So I went back in, did the training for 6 months, and then I attempted an officer's course. So it was a 3-day initial selection, and I made it through to the 3rd day, and then I was coming off a high wall, and I had not disclosed that I was a gymnast at school, and I dislocated my shoulder. So next thing I know, I'm off that wall, I'm lying on my back, and my shoulder's dislocated, and that was me off the officer's course. So then I thought, what now? So I thought I'd go back and I'd continue and do the 3-month medical training, which was, I think, if I remember, was based on the Israeli training. So at the end of that, you could do any level of drips, cut downs, you could operate in the bush. There was nothing we couldn't do. So it was all drips, drugs, evacuation, drips, before the choppers came down to pick them up. So I did that, and then I got posted up to Inyanga, which is on the eastern border by Mozambique. So, for those that don't know, Rhodesia, we're surrounded by 3 black countries on left, top, and right, and at the bottom is South Africa. We were on the right-hand side, on the eastern side, and arrived at the company. Most of the medics with my training were placed in MI rooms, but the medics, there were 5 of us, and we were placed in 4-man sticks. So I joined an intake called 147, and there's actually 2 books written on that group. One was called
Really?
Holes in Our Lives Forever. A beautiful book, very powerful book. Reading it many years afterwards was it had impact. I was irritable for days. And then a second book was written on the 147. So I worked with the 147 for 7 months. Yeah, it was a strange war, Denny. I mean, as you said, short shorts, brown T-shirt. My running shoes, all I did was paint the stripes off the running shoes. No socks, no camo, no cream on the face until about, I think, in 1977, towards the end, they made putting back on your longs and your camo shirt and painting your face black. They made that compulsory. Then we'd have the camo scarves just wrapped around our heads for the sweat. And off we went. I mean, as the medic, at the usual, as you know, we carried the FN 7.62, either the plastic stock or the wooden stock. I think they were South African or Belgium stocks. And then we had, what do we have? We each had an HE grenade, a phos grenade, a smoke grenade, and an Icarus flare, spare ammunition. And then draped, there were no such thing as efficient packs. So draped around me in all parts were drips, drugs, medical kits. So I was just walking around with all this stuff draped on me. Patrols would be 7 to 10 days, and you wouldn't get resupplied. So you'd carry food for 7 to 10 days. And water, we had those pills in the good old days. You'd go to a stream and then drop the pills in and drink it. I managed to get my intake down to 1 tin of beans a day. So they were called Yemo beans.
Man.
And they were really good beans. But what was interesting was the boys ate the bully beef and the sausages with the baked beans. And because we were filthy, so you slept in your clothes, you slept in your shoes. Because you were so dirty, you were getting what was called felt sores, which was a kind of circular raised sore on your body. I never got that, and all I can think was my diet was pretty clean and minimal. But you'd literally stay at night. You'd kind of maybe put your longs on, your camo jacket. We'd move into a sleeping position at night, cook, and then walk away and double back into a sleeping position. We'd either sleep out in the open, or we would put our bivvies down. And I mean, I remember sleeping in howling thunderstorms. Under those things, just a sheet of plastic draped 4 corners. And I think we got pretty slack. I mean, we were walking in territory where terrorists walked in groups of 30 to 300. And one of our sticks, when I went on R&R from the 147, walked into 300 terrorists in 3 long rows. One guy was killed. One guy, I think, was shot in the buttocks, and 2 were okay. But, they scattered and ran. But at the end of the day, we just used to go to sleep at night. It was ridiculous. How we weren't killed was unbelievable. And you just get up the next day. We do OPs, depending on what we were asked to do. Ambushes, the usual, put out your claymores and just line up, the 4 of us. And just 4 people. And it didn't seem odd. It didn't seem small. It was standard operational technique for the Rhodesian Army. And where we were, they were HDF operations, which were the high density force operations. So there were small man sticks operating in very small, tight areas. Look, my war was very easy compared to the RLI, the SAS, and the Selous Scouts. The RLI were jumping in from 500 feet off the choppers, straight in. They'd open and hit the ground. And as they landed, they would run straight in, but literally straight into contacts. That was their way of managing contacts. And these guys were going into 5 contacts a day, from 20, 30 meters away. So I didn't have that kind of a war. The 147 didn't do any cross-border stuff. I mean, there's a very famous story around, they discovered a camp, I think it was in Mozambique. I stand to be corrected, but it housed about 5,000 terrorists. And the Selous Scouts did a reconnaissance, identified it, and the Scouts, the SAS, the RLI, and I think RAR, which were the Rhodesian African Rifles, they decked out a number of 4-5 vehicles, so they looked like Frelimo vehicles, and they mounted MAGs on the corners. And they drove in, and the story goes that the terrorists saw the Frelimo coming in, were celebrating, calling out to them, and surrounding them. So with thousands of these guys surrounding the 4-5s. And then at one point, one of the terrorists looked through the slits in the vehicle and saw blue eyes, which, you don't have if you're a black person.
Yeah.
So all hell broke loose, and the guys opened up with 4-5s, with the 7.62s, they just opened up, and I think they killed 2,500 terrorists in that raid. So, those boys had a different war. Selous Scouts had a different war. As conscripts, we walked in 4-man sticks. We patrolled. There were contacts. But it was a different war. So, I would always describe myself as a very ordinary soldier. I mean, I got to do some great stuff. I mean, one hilarious story is the 4 of us were in the area of a contact. So we were called in and we moved in. And there was a bloke in a thorn bush, and he was bleeding out big time. So I got in the bush with him, and his veins were collapsed. So I pulled out my drips, the needles, and I couldn't get a drip in. And I turned around, and I had about 5 cannulas around me, and one of the cannulas had stuck in my leg with his blood, which is not a good idea.
Yeah, it's not good.
So it's not good. So oh Christ. So I had to pull out. So the boys are watching me, and I pull out a vial of antihistamine. And the needles in those days were about that long. And I threw it into my leg and then wriggled the rest in, pumped in the antihistamine. And then I said to the boy, before I got groggy, I said to him, hey, listen, that was antibiotic. Sorry, I put in the antibiotic. I said to the guy, mate, I can't get a vein, so I'm going to put it up your backside. And the guys are going, you what? And an SAS guy who trained me, taught me this trick. So I pulled his trousers off, took the needle off, and parted his cheeks, rammed it up, and squeezed in about 2 liters of Ringer's lactate. I mean, it saved the guy's life, but it was certainly something that was talked about for a while.
Oh, yeah.
So, it went on. I operated for about 7 months. At the end of that, I had enough. It was, I was conscripted, and I just needed to get out of that war.
Yeah.
And I managed to get back into university, and then the rest of life happened. But, there were some good times, Denny. I mean, on my first night in, we were on, it's called a Gomo, which is a small hill, a rocky outcrop, camped out with another platoon. And I woke up at about 2:00 in the morning with a guy going, Jesus Christ. So, and there'd been rounds flying around because one platoon had got spooked, and they were FOSS rounds, so you could see them zipping overhead.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh man, this is my first night. This is not looking good. And then I get up and I go, what's the problem? And the guy goes, and I look up, and there is a round circle of cloud about 300 feet across. No wind, no clouds. Then another circle within that, which was semi-see-through. And then a major with binoculars could see a cigar-shaped object in the middle of this. And this thing rises up, then it disappears. When I got back to camp, I said to the guys on R&R, I said to the guys, look, I saw this. And they go, big deal. We see them all the time in the war, all the time. So fascinating, man. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we had amazing times, Denny. I mean, I remember.
I mean, war is one thing. When you see something you cannot explain.
No. It's like I was working, because for the last 22 years I was working with military and veterans in Australia. Mm-hmm. And a sniper came in and he said to me, he said, I've never sold this to anyone, but he said, with your history, I need to say it. And I said, go for it. And he said, the thing I miss most is hunting men. And he looked at me and I said to him, I understand. Because I remember to this day just tracking prints. I remember probably the thing that really made a huge imprint on me was the four of us were on an OP, and we saw what looked like about 200 meters away in the bush, and it was very much savanna type in that area we were working on. And they were wearing overalls, which was a sign, and they were carrying objects over their shoulders. So the stick leader was a tracker, and the two of us decided we were going to go after them, and if they were terrorists, we'd do what we needed to do. So he circled around the hill, and I went on top, and I lined up on the guy, and he said, "Just wait." Now, I was a vegan. The army couldn't quite get over the fact that this vegetarian vegan arrived. So, what are you going to do with ratbacks? But I can tell you, as a vegan, Denny, I lined up on this guy, and all I could think was, yeah. And for me, that was like something in me changed at that point. There was no horror, there was no apprehension, there was no "this is wrong." It was, yep, let's go for it. And from that day on to the present, and I've worked with the guys because I track this in myself, is how do you work with the fact that a part of you now can kill without any hesitation and deal with it, but yet you are also a loving father, a good person, and a responsible mate? And how do you reconcile the two parts? And that left me with quite an imprint that helped me work with the people I work for, because I've supported. Because how do you combine the two? The other one, Denny, was on, we have in Sydney a march called the Anzac March, which is from World War II vets in jeeps because they're too old to the present, including the Rhodesians. We march. And it's amazing. Thousands of people just thanking you for your service as you do a brief sort of 10-minute march. And I remember being surrounded by a couple of SAS, a couple of Zulu Scouts, and quite a large group of RLI. And I remember feeling quite inadequate. It was almost as if I didn't deserve to be in this lot. And it was a very uncomfortable feeling. And as I worked with the guys, I'd ask them, how do you feel about wearing your medals? How do you feel about marching? And there was always, and 90% of the people I sat with, there was always a flicker and that sense of shame and not being good enough. And I've learned, even with you guys and the Navy SEALs, I've spoken to people who went, "We didn't see enough action. I don't feel good enough." So, my service in many ways set me up for understanding the stuff that's never talked about.
Yeah.
When I wrote my book, the book brought to light the things that would never be raised and would not be seen by anyone who's either had the experience or tracked that experience within themselves. So yeah, Denny, it was an extraordinary thing. When I look back on my photograph and there I am with these tiny black shorts, just like
this young man, just tiny, wet behind the ears, young man, and and it just the entire world is just going on around them. But in that one moment in that picture, is just you see just a youth. You're able to capture just a young man serving.
Yeah.
And I want to go back to something you just talked about, that so many of us don't reflect on that. We're a human being tasked to do something that's nearly impossible, to remove your humanity for however long you're in combat, and to execute with precision and without any sort of remorse. And a lot of people don't understand that it's important for us as men to talk about this, because there's a lot of guys that feel that they're inferior or they're not good enough because they didn't have this epic war experience. Well, I didn't go to selection. I wasn't a Ranger. I wasn't a Navy SEAL. Or I didn't get this action moment. It's like, dude, you went to war. Like, be grateful that you were there to answer the call. Be grateful for all the great that came from it, but don't be upset that you missed out on certain aspects of it.
Yeah, correct. And I mean, I think the thing to realize is the minute you put on uniform, you've earned the right to call yourself a veteran. The depth to which you explore that uniform is unpredictable. Whether there are people in the early days who never had a chance, SAS who've never had a chance to operate, SEALs in the very early days who didn't have a chance to do much, Green Berets, I'm sure, as well. And so it's how we define who we are. And the other thing I think, as I've often said, and I track this in myself and then I tracked it in the guys, is when I stripped away everything, what was left inside me was grief. And the grief could have been for the things I've seen, for the people that were lost, even for the parts of me that changed when the rest of life followed and disasters happened. Because my war didn't end after the Rhodesian Bush War. I mean, I came out and within 3 days I was back at university, waking up maybe 20, 30 times a night. I had severe headaches and body aches and pains, which I don't normally have. I think I was just de-stressing from being, almost, I don't think I had many R&Rs. So, you're out a lot of the time. And just trying to adjust. And then from there, I mean, I scooted through 5 immigrations, 2 failed marriages, one of which was extremely stressful because it involved a lot of complications. And I often said that my war really only stopped when I turned 60, because at 60 I kind of settled. I met my current wife, an extraordinary woman from Brazil. And so for the last 11 years, I've had peace. But until 60, I was living on just high levels of stress. And to the extent that, I had adrenal burnout, which has its impact on a whole lot of stuff. So the war didn't stop. The war, in fact, really only began properly and intensely when I left at a non-military level. And I often say the war wasn't my biggest stress, because if it got in the way, you knew how to deal with it. But there are things that can happen in civilian life that almost feel out of your control. And I know that in the transition process for the guys and the girls, I call it it's another operational arena. And
you're so right on that. It is one of the hardest things anybody will ever do when they're coming off. And if you don't do it right, if you don't have the right guidance, or even just a book, I found one book to be so helpful. But if you don't have that, and you don't have somebody to talk to that's gone through it themselves, like, you're potentially going to suffer the same thing, the same outcome that so many veterans have gone through. And it's what I've found is there's a multiple of things that occur, but the identity piece,
huge.
That's the one that's so hard for so many. And I have to imagine that was probably one of the factors that you dealt with for a long time.
Huge, Denny. I mean, think about it. You guys come from war, but you've got your country, and there's a pride. Outside the Vietnam era, there's a pride in serving. My country, we went from southern Rhodesia as a British colony. Then they declared independence. We went to Rhodesia. After Rhodesia, it went to Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. Then it went to Zimbabwe. I left when it turned into Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. I left in 1977. I never got my passport, a new passport. I was stateless in Australia, 1980 to 82. And so where does my generation belong? The Rhodesians don't exist anymore. The country that we belong to, we don't have a right of entry into. And in fact, I'm not sure how well we'd be received. I don't know about now. And the country that was described as the breadbasket of Africa is now the Dust Bowl of Africa. The human rights violations that happened under Mugabe, not towards whites, but towards blacks. It just, where we were born is now an ongoing nightmare. And I think that's part of the grief, is where do we belong? And if it weren't for the internet emerging, we would never have had a tribe unless we happened to bump into people. The interesting thing as well for us is that black and white, we didn't have apartheid like South Africa had. We had a white government, a white minority ruling a black majority, which probably was not a good idea at all. But there was always an amazing relationship between white and black today Zimbabweans or Rhodesians in my time. And even today, when I meet and work with a Zimbabwean person, the bond between us, irrespective of color, is incredibly close. But, when you lose tribe to the extent that we lost it, finding out and recovering who you are is extremely difficult. It's not easy at all, Danny.
No, I can't even imagine that. And you're right. Like when we came back, regardless of the way that things developed in Afghanistan, you still have a country, you still have a nation you belong to, you still have that flag you look to. But in your case, when everything is gone, how do you ground? Who do you connect with? And it's just it's almost like a sci-fi novel to think of it. A man with no nation now, a warrior with no nation. Where do you go? And it knowing your story, knowing that you began to travel and adventure seek and do these adventure races and go everywhere. And that speaks to me as somebody that is looking for a home, homesick.
Completely. I mean, I always said that when I run, I'm deeply connected to everything around me because I run in nature. I feel the trees, I feel the ground beneath my feet. And sometimes it was almost as if I felt that point in time as a soldier walking through the bush, that sense of attunement, and I really belonged. And I just chased that and chased it and pushed the kilometers up. And, eventually it just, there's no solution in that. I was never going to really find healing in that. And, my last run was an 89-kilometer uphill run called the Comrades Ultramarathon in South Africa. And it's like, I'd run about 3 months before that. I ran my first ultra. It was like 64, 31, 32 down, 32 up. And I flew, Denny. I was running like 5.5 Ks a minute.
My gosh.
I was flat out. And so I hit this marathon. And a mate of mine was with me.
Possessed.
Yeah, I was a lot of demons whispering in my ear. And my mate said to me, "Do you see down there in the mists?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "That's not even halfway." And I remember having this sense of impending panic. And about 64 Ks, I blew my iliotibial, and I thumped my way through to because I was going to finish it whether it killed me or not. But that was my greatest run because I had to battle with the voices of my ancestors. I always say I love hills because I talk to my ancestors on a hill. They whisper in my ears. But then after that, my back blew, all sorts of stress from life situations, but always thinking I could keep pushing against my body aging in nature and still find my healing within that. And I was never going to do that, but I didn't get it. It was just 8 out of 10 of my runs had to be beyond hard, whereas it should have been the other way around. But I didn't understand moderation. And that's a lesson to this day that I take to the people I work with. And I go, it took me till I had no knee left and I could no longer run to understand what I was doing. Don't wait for that point.
Yeah. That's a hard thing to do, being able to slow down. That's like we always gravitate to the physical. That's everybody's first thing. I'm going through something, I'm going to work out. I'm going through something, I'm going to run it out. I'm going to get over this mental anguish, this pain, by just working myself to the point where I am just done. But it never works. It's still there. Feels good.
Yeah,
you look good in the mirror, but it's still there.
Well, we're never going to run ahead of our grief because that's all it is.
Oh, yeah.
It's grief. And the image that came to me on a run one day was, it's like you're running, but behind you are a pack of wolves, and they're your grief. They everything that sits in your heart and in your body. And they maintain a distance of 200 meters. And it doesn't matter how fast you run, the 200 meters they keep. And one day, when you stop because you have to, they surround you, and then the conversation begins. And I've said to guys, have that conversation earlier on, because it poisons your relationship, it poisons your life, and it poisons how you journey into your future. And it did for me. And I suppose, from an honest point of view, even today, I'm not comfortable with grief. I mean, and as Rhodesians, we never really talked too much about feelings, and nobody ever told us about war. We fought a war and lived. And so, we could be watching a movie and my wife will watch me and go, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yep." And she goes, "Are you sure you're okay?" And I go, "Yep." And I'm self-reflecting, thinking, I'm a psychologist and, really, should I be doing this job? And then, of course, the next thing I'm in tears. And that grief, I don't know, I can't say we ever get rid of the grief, but I think as we work with the grief, it becomes our source of compassion and service. So it's productive and fertile, but you have to be able to embrace it and befriend it. And that's painful.
Yeah.
Holding the grief is terribly uncomfortable.
It is. And as men, we don't like to talk about it or embrace the idea of it's okay to cry, but it has to come out. You have to do something with that emotion. And one of the greatest things you can do is give yourself the grace and the freedom to cry when you're going through something. And whether it's a funeral, the loss of a friend, the memory of a friend comes through, give yourself time and space to really feel it, or you're going to be fighting that and you're going to be seeking other things to try to numb out and try to kill it. And all you need to do is, it's perfectly fine to go somewhere private, to be around people that can support you, then vent that emotion. Be willing to cry around the people that, because nobody wants to cry openly in a grocery store. Nobody wants to cry. Or a movie theater, and it's completely fine to go home and have your spouse or have your close friends hold space for you. It's okay to have that moment with trusted individuals. But it's so often, we so often do that through alcohol or drugs.
Spot on.
And it's like, it's killing us. Like, no, you don't need alcohol to cry.
No, you don't need. And it's, the alcohol, the drugs, the extreme sports, none of that is going to create the healing that we all need.
Yeah.
And the problem is, and I find my new transitional, almost my new operational territory is aging. I really am facing parts now where, what does this look like for me in the time I've got left? I mean, I'm 71 this year, and I don't know what's left. I know my knee's gone. I know I've got blown discs. I've got pins in my shoulder. I was at the specialist yesterday looking at my spine because the MRI report, this bulges, this is narrowing. And he said to me, "No, you're right." He said, "For your age, you're right." But I feel restriction. And it creates a lot of stress for me because at the moment, my wife and I walk and I've got my cross trainer with the iFit software. But what happens when I don't even have that? And so what happens when our physicality is taken away? What's left in the corners of our room in those dark, dusty little spaces? You know what? That's the spot that scares the hell out of me sometimes. That stuff.
Yeah. It's funny we're talking about this because that's something that all of us need to put a pin on and explore now. And when we have to be willing to understand that age is a process. We're gonna, you're gonna lose that muscle tone. You're gonna lose the ability to run those 5-mile runs, and that's okay. We're human beings. But it's important for us to have a multitude of things that we can fall back on. And when we don't have those resources, we don't have that multitude of habits and productive workouts that we do, or things like meditation. We're going to be constantly raging at the world for the things that we don't have, and we're completely missing the things that we do have.
Spot on.
Always have this. Always have this. That's a beautiful thing about meditation that I realized when I found it. I was still recovering from surgeries, and I couldn't do all those wonderful things that all Green Berets do. You can't run, you can't work out like you're 22 again. So it's like, no, but you can breathe, and you can walk, and you can meditate, and you can realize that, hey, all things come and go. And that includes physical.
They do. And I think what I'm grateful for is, one, I'm really disciplined. So, For the majority of my life, I do things called the Tibetan 5 exercises, which is 21 repetitions of 5 exercises. It's 8 minutes, you've done 100 and something repetitions. I've got some yin yoga stretches. I've got other stuff. So I've got about 40 minutes that I do 7 days a week, month after year after year. I also meditate. I started meditating 47 years ago. And now, being on holiday, I sit for 2.5 hours, and I sit every single day. And I said to my wife only yesterday, it's like, when I meditate, the world makes sense to me. It just does. And so, as you say, you need to look at the strategies that you can use through your aging that actually work on your body: yoga, tai chi, stretching, meditation, breath work, cold water. I was a great component, for 3 years. I have a theory that we must never lose moments of discomfort. And
yes, absolutely.
And push it, find it, but in incremental doses. And so my moments of discomfort where I made a commitment I was going to have cold showers for a couple of years. And so that's what I did, cold showers, and I'd look at it and there'd be a fight internally, but I had my cold showers. I was doing the Wim Hof breath work. And only now, because the cold on the back and the spine, it needs more heat. Only about 2 weeks ago, I started going back into hot showers. But, those 3 years, every time I come out of a cold shower, every time I meditate, every time I do my series of exercises, even when I don't want to do it, I'm still in the race. That fire inside me is still burning. We never need to lose that fire. We never need to lose our warrior, to use that.
Absolutely.
But if we don't look at how we do it properly, then we are damaged in alcohol issues, drug issues, overweight issues. And I see the weight issue on a lot of veterans. They crank on the weight. The minute we do that, your body is what you operate with in civilian life and military life. It's a thing that carries everything, and we need to look after it. So, a lot of lessons I wish I was around earlier on to tell me.
That's the beauty of this platform, and it's understanding that no matter how many times, if reincarnation is a thing, no matter how many times we relive this life, we're never going to get it 100%.
No, we're never. No.
Even if that's the way it works, we're never going to get it perfect. So why stress about getting it perfect this time around? And the reality is, we stay connected, we become mentors, we gain new insight to our life and to our process, and then we share it with the younger generation. And that's the beauty of it, because then we're not really losing out. We're passing off all that knowledge and lived experience to the next guy.
Which is why, I think, for example, the book that we were involved in with Sarah Correll is a collection of those stories that I think are really healing.
Yes.
And I think we need to gather these stories now. We need to be able to share conversations. I was looking up, it's funny, when I was getting ready just to have this conversation, I looked at some of the stats about our war, which I've never really thought about. And the stats indicate somewhere around 2,500 people at service, of which 1,900 were security, lost their lives. These are people whose generation should exist to this day. These are people that should be men in their 70s enjoying their grandchildren, but are no longer with us. And for what? We don't have any. It's a bit like Afghanistan, I guess. What? On a more positive note, though, 22,000 terrorists did lose their lives.
Yes.
So they say it's for everyone. Every one of us they killed. We killed a lot more of them, 80, 90, 100 of them, which is a harsh thing to say, but, one should never take pleasure in death. But a war is war.
And that's a reality. There are bad people in the world, and they're without good guys, bad guys prevail. And that's the truth. And that's the beauty of reconciling that aspect of ourselves. Like, it's okay to embrace that part of you that was of service up to and including executing that very harsh and extreme justice.
Yeah,
Like,
I think. And you know, I mean, our tragedy is that we had about 500 civilians killed, and 200 of those, Denny, terrorists took, I think they were SAM-7 missiles, and they knocked down a Viscount, and I think the other one, I can't remember the plane, but on the Viscount disaster, there were, I think there were 100 civilians on that plane. And the terrorists came on the plane and they bayoneted and killed the babies and the mothers. And you know, that reminds me a lot about what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, but I'm not going to go there. With 12 or 1,500 people slaughtered. But that kind of stuff for me is evil. And, evil does not deserve to exist on this earth. War is war, but women and children, So I think Rhodesians, we all carry an individual grief and we carry a collective grief. And I'm sure in many ways it's the same with your generation as well. The challenge is how we transform the grief and how we carry the wisdom of that and the finding of tribe into our present and do something good.
Yes.
There's a song, I think from the 70s, and the song is, what are you going to leave behind? What song will you leave behind when you are no longer around? And that's like the stuff you share, the books we write, the books we are in. These are the songs we leave behind, the service that we do, every one person's life that we touch by being there and having their six. These are the things we need to be focused on. And, it's not just about healing. It's not just about belonging to tribe. It's also about the quality of service. And I think when we commit to some level of service, that has the most powerful component of healing as well. So those are all, when you want a 360 of everything, these are the things we need to pay attention to. What I also wanted to say was, when I work with guys now, because they help me to understand an operational, veteran-friendly way of working. It's like I sit with the guys, and when they finish the sessions, it's "I love you, brother." Now, normal therapy doesn't have that, and it's love, and we are brothers, and we hug. And I don't do the therapy stuff. I'd be saying to the guys, "Okay, would you leave a bloke behind?" No, never. And then I go, "How come you've left yourself behind?" So I go, "Okay, we're going to form a rescue mission. You're going to go back. We're going to formulate some SOPs. We're going to go back. We're going to rescue that part of you. We're going to bring it forward. We're going to re-identify your map of your territory. We're going to reorientate your compass. We're going to do a 360 around you and look at where your gaps are and your perimeters. We're going to look at your arcs of fire and formulate direction." That makes sense. It's not, we're now going to do some cognitive stuff and explore your negative thinking. Guys are going, what? So, a big thing for me today in this time is there needs to be a change in how we work with this tribe. And, in my book, there are 10 or 11 things for therapists working with veterans and for veterans who are entering therapy. And the things like for the therapists is you are more than your certificates on the wall don't define who you are. You need to earn the right to enter their territory. A veteran can sit where he wants. You need to earn the right for trust and acceptance. For veterans, it's be critical. If he only comes in with 2 modalities, ask questions. Do we go to war with one weapon? No, we don't. So it's the same with therapy. So there needs to be a better attunement with regards to how helping allied health professionals are working with veterans. Because frankly, I don't think they get it enough. I always say the one person in America that does get it is old Doc Shauna Springer, because she nails it. She says, are you going to be a doc or a doctor? Doctor, certificates on the wall. I've got my table, I've got my chair, you sit there. A doc is, man, I love you. Let's do this journey together. And that territory is as yet not well defined, which means that our veterans come back, try to transition, and end up in a mess with people that don't understand them and haven't earned the right to sit opposite them. So, I'm a bit hot under the collar with that one, but I think I've got a right to be hot under the collar with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've experienced it myself, but I've been fortunate enough that I've experienced the positive as well.
Yeah.
I've had some remarkable, wonderful practitioners, and the key to it was people that have that lived experience.
Correct.
The loss doesn't have to be the same.
No.
It doesn't have to be the same, but it certainly helps when they can build the rapport. They're being able to explain and have some of that self identity, like be able to identify what they've been through, what they've gone through, and share. Like that's been a huge factor in my healing, being able to sit down with somebody that holds space for me that I can trust because they've been through something similar.
Correct.
And it's, you're right, Barry. Like we need more docs, not doctors.
Yeah, and that's the one thing I guess I pushed really hard against. That was the reason I wrote 50% of the reason I wrote that book was doctors need to read it. Then the second part was, it gives veterans a guided territory to operate through, but there needs to be a change. We should not settle for second best. We should not settle for modalities that don't understand that trauma lives in the body.
Yep.
It's not
body
here.
Keeps a score.
Yeah, the body keeps a score, and yet so many modalities of frontal cortex space, and the guys go, "Yep, I understand everything, but I'm still stuck in the emotion."
Yeah.
And I think we're not there yet. I mean, there are good people, as you've experienced, but there are also a lot of people who have zero experience, taking their tools and thinking that they can do everything they want. It's just, it's unacceptable. These people have had enough. They've gone to the edge of darkness. They're trying to get back into who they are, and they can't be surrounded by people that impede their progress. So I always ask, have a critical look and think about whether you're part of the solution or part of the problem.
Absolutely. And Barry, what's the name of the book again?
Which way is your warrior facing? Yeah, you can stick a link on it. Amazon have it, but
and I mean description.
That's not my book. That book is 22 years of sitting with the most extraordinary men from Vietnam to the present, where it wasn't me that came up with it. It was between the two of us. I discovered, I've got this language that, pull-throughs. Yeah. Getting a guy in a pull-through, an AD is uncontrollable anger. A stoppage is anxiety and depression. And a runaway gun is, man, your wife's going to throw you out any second. And so what are your pull-throughs every day? It could be getting out of bed for those that are struggling. Just get out of bed, make your bed, go to the post box, go for a walk. For others, it could be fitness, nutrition, sleep, teaching gratitude, meditation. But what are your pull-throughs? Without your pull-throughs, you're going to have a dirty barrel. And we know, veterans know, what happens when your barrel's dirty. So if you can maintain that discipline in operations, you can maintain the same discipline. Incremental changes that you do every single day is a pull-through.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I don't know, Danny, the more we do this and these conversations around these kind of topics, maybe somebody listening to that today can go, I get it. And maybe one leaf on a forest of people that are wounded and traumatized can change, one leaf at a time.
Oh, yeah. I know it does. And it already has an impact. And it's a growing movement. More and more people are starting the conversation in their own shows, their own podcasts, YouTube series. And it's wonderful. And we already see the outpouring of emails. Even now in Spotify, you can, if you go to Spotify right now, you can actually text message the show and send information. And I've got that for several episodes where people reach out while they're listening saying like, man, like this helped me today. So there's more of us are becoming more having that ability to advocate for change, because I'm tired of seeing people dying. I'm tired of seeing people resort to suicide and not pause and reflect that maybe there's another answer. Maybe there's a different way. And it does take work. It's not, at the end of the day, when you're able to walk back off that ledge, walk back from that, making that horrible mistake, you have to look at life as something that is worth living, and you have to look at healing as something that you're willing to work at and strive for. Because I wish it was a magic wand. I really wish it was a magic pill, but the reality is it is a journey. It is simply learning to live better and loving all aspects of it. The good, the bad, the ugly, the not so awesome.
Yeah, spot
and
on.
then understanding that that's life.
Yeah.
That's life. All the great stuff, the knee aches, the back breaking, and the issues, like all that stuff. It's not fun, but when you can take a moment and reflect and see, like, holy shit, I'm still here. I'm still fucking in this thing. Like, that's beautiful.
Yeah. With gratitude.
Yes.
You know, I almost unconsciously, I often say to my wife, I will wake up maybe like most of us do at 2:00 in the morning. And I will think about, you know, somebody I love, a roof over my head. I'm still working full time. Gratitude is the one thing that helps us transition through the darkness. It's that light. And the more we repeat it, the more it gets wired into the brain, the more it becomes real. But Denny, I also wanted to say that your contribution to Words for Wisdom, right? The book.
Wounds to Wisdom.
Wounds to Wisdom. I also want to personally thank you for all the time and the effort you put in with the videos, and not just your contribution, but what you and Sarah have done is extraordinary. And seriously, I would strongly, not because individual stories are in it, but the collection of those stories is a guiding light into healing. And when you share the shared experiences, you identify the parts of yourself that may have shame, that may have moral injury, that may have guilt, that may have trauma. And the very act of sharing that book will help people to disembed from what they're stuck in. Then with that, you're ready to move on to other modalities and a lot of the guys have written books, and there's a lot of help out there. But that book, I believe, is going to be a guiding light into helping people navigate into a better life. And really, Danny, thanks, man. Your dedication, it means an incredible lot in terms of what you've put in, you know.
It's my pleasure, brother. Thank you. And it's something that I intimately just have this connection. It's absolutely everything that's part of my mission and my purpose. And it's all it took that first email hearing about, I'm like, why don't we branch off and do a limited series podcast? Because people need to hear the voice of the individual sharing their lived experience, and sharing some of their, and just how it was so impactful listening to your episode as we were recording. And just like you broke it down earlier, like, veterans know veterans. We sit down, we are a tribe. But what a lot of us don't understand is that understanding of, you are now a man without a nation. You are now somebody without a home. Where do you go? And you have to build that. And you can build it, and you found your way in Australia. You found your home. You have an amazing life, and it's hard earned. But it's that initial understanding that it came with a lot of work, because when we came home from Afghanistan, we were able to go right back into our 9-to-5, be able to fall back in line and navigate all that, knowing we had a nation, we had a country. And your story hit me like a bag of bricks, knowing that, holy shit, one day you were there, the next, everything changes.
Nothing. I mean, the sense of dislocation is profound, but also, you know, finding the power of our story and meeting you guys and Sarah and the guys and the girls. I mean, you know, I always say what we do is, when we return to tribe, it implants inside us.
Yes.
And in the moments between the meetings, we live in each other. And those are the things we draw on when things get tough, because we are no longer alone.
Absolutely. And Barry, thank you so much for being here with me.
Thanks, my friend.
Hanging tough. It's a pleasure having you. I can't wait to dig into more of your story. And I think we've got to have you come back to talk about the adventure racing and some of your travels, because we didn't even touch that. You've done so much and been all over the world. And that's something that I think all of us as men that have lived and fought, there's a part of us that wants to continue. That's one of the things that I loved about special operations, was the travel. being able to feel like I was just always gone. And
Yeah.
even though I don't want to travel anymore these days, there's still a little bit of me that's looking forward to that next adventure. But that's more than enough for us to talk about next time. Barry, thank you for being here. The name of the book is Which Way is Your Warrior Facing? Go to the episode description. The link will be there. Or go to Amazon. There's a link for it there too. And please go get the book and support our man, Barry. Barry, thank you again, brother. And we'll see you all next time. Till then, take care.
Thanks, Denny. And anyone's free to contact me on LinkedIn. Happy to contribute.
Perfect.
But thanks, brother. I value you, man.
Heck yeah, brother. Likewise.